de Boer, I've come a very long way to ask you this question, so I hope you'll bear with me if I take a little more time about it. The way that I look at it, 3.9 billion years ago, the Earth was the sun was 25% cooler than it is today. But the temperature of the Earth was actually too hot for there to be life on Earth because the quantity of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere held the heat against the planet. And during the course of the time between then and 250 million years ago, the various coccolithophorid bacteria and blue-green algae and various other organisms took that carbon dioxide out of circulation and put it into coal, oil, and limestone. Now, we have been, for the last 200 years, since the Industrial Revolution began, we have actually been taking that safety mechanism that made this Earth in the first place possible for life on Earth, and we have been actually putting that carbon dioxide back into the atmosphere for already, as far as we're concerned, too long. So for me it is very distressing to actually come to a conference like this and find that instead of actually talking about stopping what we're doing and indeed actually doing some carbon scrubbing and reforestation on a massive level to try and undo what we've done, we're actually talking about reducing possibly by 2020, possibly by 2050, to half. I mean, it's as though you don't understand that before 250 million years ago, the Earth was too hot for us to live on because these gases were in circulation, and we have already put some of those gases back. And we should be actually declaring a state of emergency as far as we're concerned and working out how to stop the use of fossil fuels, and that is already possible. If you read the book by Ms. Georges Monbiot, it's there. So what I want to know, my question to you is this appropriate to speak of, to have a conference like this, given the nature of what fossil fuels are actually doing to the atmosphere?
You said you'd come a long way to ask this question. Judging by your accent, you've come from South Africa to ask me that question. I think that as a matter of principle, of course, you're absolutely right that we've, since the Industrial Revolution, pumped a quantity of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere that is already resulting in serious impacts around the world, especially in developing countries. But there are some other realities out there as well, and I'm not saying one is more important than the other, but another reality that's out there is that in India alone, there are 400 million people who do not have access to electricity and really would like to have access to electricity, either to use it to cook or to have lighting for their children so they can read their study books in the evening. The fact is that we are confronted worldwide with a huge energy challenge. The International Energy Agency has calculated that if we see the healthy economic growth around the world which is expected, and if you are to supply the electricity that's going to have to fuel that economic growth, not just in the context of rich countries getting even richer, but more importantly in the context of countries where millions of people are living on less than $1 a day to eradicate poverty and safeguard economic growth, then to supply the energy to fuel that economic growth, the next 25 years, $20 trillion is going to be invested in power supply. And if we do not have in place an international policy that's going to limit the growth of emissions and then reduce emissions, then in the absence of that policy, we will see global emissions go up by 50% instead of the down by 50% that the scientific community is telling us is necessary. The scientific community is telling us we have a 10 to 15 year window of opportunity to get global rising emissions to shift to a downward trend. So given the fact that that we're confronted with such a huge economic challenge as well, the question is, the question that we will have to find the beginning of an answer to here in Bali is how can you create a long-term climate change regime that allows you to alter that emission trend through industrialized countries taking on much more stringent emission reduction obligations, and then gradually through international cooperation lowering emissions in developing countries while at the same time safeguarding economic growth. So I would agree with you that we're on a very dangerous path. At the same time, I have the feeling that we're confronted with some economic and some poverty imperatives that force us to try and find a sensible way forward. The challenge is that basically the scientists are telling us we have just 10 or 15 years in order to find the answer to that very complex question.